as are the rest of us. I've now heard from the 4 German doctors, and now you're going to hear from the 2 Eriks. Just want to get my presentation up with you. Okay, I'm Erik van der Vyver. I'm a patent attorney from Von Seidels, as an intellectual property attorneys. We're a boutique IP firm in Cape Town, South Africa, and we also practice throughout the rest of Africa, or all African countries. One thing that I want to say right from the beginning is this is a quite unexplored space. So if at the end of what I have to say you have questions, just bear in mind that you're not alone. Most of us have a lot of questions about what's happening in Africa. But luckily for our colleagues in Germany and the rest of Europe and the US, we have a lot more guidance as to where things should be going and where we think things will be going in future. So instead of giving you the position on one country and just a few countries, I have the unenviable task of giving you the situation in over 50 countries. So instead of going into details in all those countries, I'm going to show you a bunch of pretty pictures. In terms of background, just to put things into perspective, it's just useful to see what Africa is and what the potential is that lies in Africa. And it's just an interesting example of how big Africa really is. And most countries that we've spoken about actually fit within Africa. And so it gives you a good idea of the beast that you're dealing with here. A few statistics. Africa, as of estimate last year, has about 1.1 billion people, about 15% of the world population. The countries shown there are the 5 biggest countries in Africa by number of people, and interestingly, an estimate of how long it will take for those figures to double. A country like Nigeria sees 177 million people and estimated to double within as little as 20 to 22 years. Also interestingly is those 5 countries constitute about 40% of the African population. They are also 5 of the few countries that do not fall within any of the regional intellectual property protection systems that are given by Africa, and I'll speak a bit about those later. In terms of economies, the 5 largest economies in Africa, South Africa is first by quite some bit. Nigeria, Egypt, Algeria, Angola. Those are the big 5 economic powerhouses of Africa as things stand. Here's some pretty pictures. It's just nice to know what you're talking about, and I think people often have a wrong impression of what's going on in Africa. They are pretty substantial, pretty big cities throughout Africa. This is Lagos in Nigeria, one of the fastest growing cities on the planet. Dar es Salaam in Tanzania, very big city, very active city. Luanda in Angola, someone said earlier it actually reminds them of the beachfront in Mumbai. I can definitely see the similarities. And I had to throw in a picture of Cape Town, which is my home city, and it's a city I feel very passionate about, and a lot's happening. So what's been happening in Africa over the last 10, 20 years? And there's been a significant technological explosion. 5 of the world's top 10 fastest growing countries are situated in Africa. And this whole boom has essentially been driven by mobile telecoms. It's really most probably because of the lack of infrastructure and the very quick possibilities that mobile telecoms gave to the continent, and the possibilities of rapid expansion without having to put in significant physical infrastructure. It's estimated that more than 1 billion mobile phone subscriptions will be in place in Africa, will be in place by 2016. Which makes it the 2nd largest mobile market in the world, second to Asia only, but still the fastest growing mobile market in the world. It's interesting to know how this mobile market looks. It's slightly different to the rest of the world. In 2050, Africa is predicted to have 128 million smartphones, which is the phone on the left, and 723 million feature phones. Now those phones, most of you will have probably used about 10 to 15 years ago, but they are still the #1 phones throughout Africa. which means that the technological innovation in the mobile space and the computer implemented the CII space is mostly centered around pretty basic forms of communication over mobile networks, SMS, USSD, text, voice, simple graphics, and also that the majority of the processing is not necessarily done on the device. It's done off-site, it's done in some different location, which makes for some very interesting system-type computer-implemented inventions that are really prolific in the country, well, in the continent at the moment. These are sites you'll see a lot throughout the African continent, very rural areas that have very fancy cell phone towers. The one, incidentally, the one on the bottom right-hand corner is a site up in the Kruger National Park that one of my colleagues was involved in building, and they spent about a month on site, and they were guided every day by a ranger with a call it semi-automatic weapon to protect them against animals. They had to drive through herds of buffaloes every day in order to set up the tower, and on more than one occasion all the fences were trampled by elephants. So it's really out in the middle of nowhere, but still everyone in the vicinity has cell phone contact and is in communication with the outside world. Maasai Warriors from Kenya, the situation back then, bottom the situation right now. Everyone's got mobile phones, everyone's got access to technology, and one tends to think the latter might be a much more powerful warrior at this stage, with the capabilities in his hands, and all brought about by the mobile revolution throughout Africa. Leading global companies are increasingly investing in Africa. There's recognition by stable African governments that IP plays a very important part in innovation and in the development of the countries. CII has formed the platform for a lot of this development, mostly because of the accessibility of technology brought about by mobile phones. Most development in the space is driven by software in one form or another. And the unique challenges that the continent faces makes for very unique innovation. It surely has application elsewhere, but it really is innovation that breaks things down to its basic components and becomes really simple to implement. And there's some really clever things coming out of there. The big buzzword in Africa is banking the unbanked. There's a big financial drive from all over the world identifying that there are millions and millions of people that can still be banked, and there's a need, a definite need for them to be banked, and mobile technology again makes that possible. One example that I had was one of our local quite big retailers in South Africa. They set up a system to solve the problem of people working and being paid in cash. They often want to send cash back home, but they don't have banking facilities, and they also don't want to travel with the cash for fear of being robbed. And so they set up a facility where people go in the area where they work. They can go to the local retailer, deposit the money there, and then they get an SMS or a text notification with a PIN code that they can forward on to their relatives wherever they are. The relatives then just simply have to go to their local retailer in the same chain, and they can withdraw the money, of course for some small fee put on the transaction by the retailer. It was so successful that they had to cancel it within the first few months, because what they were finding is within the first few days of the month, the retailers had no more cash. They really had to shut the system down physically until they can come up with more practical, workable solutions. But it just shows you the need for very simple banking, transactional applications that there is throughout the African continent. Now, coming back to IP and protection, there are essentially two main regional systems in Africa that you can use to get protection, patent as well as trademarks. The one is more applicable to patents only. A repo is a collection of former, call it English-speaking countries, focused in southeast of Africa. The national laws of each of the countries that form part of a repo still determine whether an invention is patentable or not. The problem, however, is there's no real case law or decisions that one can go on to determine whether CIIs are in fact patentable. But because of their strong ties to Europe and English-speaking Europe in particular, the situation is that they